The first thing that comes to mind when talking about the nomads of the Great Eurasian Steppe is the tribes of the Scythians, the Huns, and the Mongols. However, among the most influential and numerous nomadic peoples, the Kipchaks stand out in particular, and they will be the focus of today's episode. Let me remind you that you are on the Amazing History channel. Here, we talk about powerful empires, talented commanders, and influential dynasties of the past. As always, you can support the channel by watching the video in full, liking, leaving kind comments, or through sponsorship on YouTube or PayPal. Now let's get started with the topic of this episode. The Kipchaks were a nomadic Turkic-speaking people who dominated the Polovtsian steppe from the 11th century until the Mongol conquest in the 13th century. In historical sources, you can find a variety of terms used to refer to them. The Byzantines and Europeans called them Cumans. In the chronicles of Rus, they were known as Polovtsians, and in Islamic sources as Kipchaks. The territory they inhabited was called Cumania by Europeans, the Polovtsian steppe in the chronicles of Rus, and Dasht or Dashti Kipchak in Islamic sources. Although these terms are sometimes used interchangeably, some sources point out differences between the groups. For example, the inhabitants of the westernmost steppes are often identified as Polovtsi. To the east of the Caspian Sea, the Kangli dominated, while the Kipchaks inhabited the steppes between them. In general, they are commonly referred to as the Cuman-Kipchak Confederation. The origin of the Polovtsi and Kipchak tribes is the subject of much debate and conflicting theories. One of them links them to a group called the Sers, mentioned in Orkhon inscriptions of the 8th century during the period of the Second Turkic Khaganate. However, this identification is disputed, as is the interpretation of other poorly preserved Turkic and Uyghur inscriptions, which may possibly contain the name Kipchak. Clearer references to the Kipchaks appear in the 9th century, when Islamic geographers identified them in the context of the Kimak Khaganate, a state that existed in eastern Kazakhstan. Over the following centuries, the Kipchaks gradually moved westward, displacing other Turkic peoples such as the Oghuz. In the 11th century, a major migration began, caused by the strengthening of the Liao dynasty's power in northern China and Mongolia. Islamic sources refer to this movement as the migrations of the Kuns, one of the main groups of this period. The Kuns quickly advanced westward, and by the 1050s they had reached the Pontic steppes, where they defeated the Pechenegs. In European sources, they became known as the Cumans, and some modern Hungarians still consider themselves to be Kuns. From the mid-11th century, the Polovtsi, who ruled the western part of the Dashti Kipchak, were the dominant nomadic people of the Eurasian steppes. Although modern sources call them a confederation, it was more like a collection of independent Turkic principalities stretching from the Carpathians to the Irtish. At the beginning of the 12th century, new ruling dynasties began to dominate their group, who apparently fled from the conquest of their territory by the Jurchen, who founded the Jin dynasty in China. In turn, the Khitan, who were displaced by the Jurchen, moved west and founded the Kara-Khitan Khanate in the 1130s. We cannot say for certain whether the Polovtsians and Kipchaks saw themselves as a single identity, since the evidence for this comes from outside observers and little is known about their internal structure. Interestingly, many of the names referring to the Western Polovtsians are associated with paleness and the color yellow. The name Cuman probably comes from an old Turkic word meaning pale or yellow. Some believe this is a reference to the steppe grasslands. Others think it refers to the light-colored horses of the Polovtsians, and some even believe it is connected to their fair-haired appearance. The Polovtsian Kipchaks were one of the dominant nomadic groups of the Eurasian steppes, ruling over Turkic nomads and other peoples. The Kipchak aristocracy controlled movement and resources, including vast herds of sheep, goats, cattle, and horses. They had designated pastures for winter and summer camps, and the society moved between them according to the seasons. The steppes were controlled by the Kipchaks. The Kipchaks led a horse-based lifestyle, practicing archery daily. They were highly skilled and mobile horse archers, which made them dangerous opponents and valuable mercenaries throughout Eurasia. In the religious sphere, they adhered to Turkic animism and worshipped Tengri. Dogs and wolves held special significance, and sources indicate a ritual of cutting a dog in half to seal alliances and marriages. Aristocrats were buried in large burial mounds with animal sacrifices, including horses and, less often, dogs. There is also evidence of their conversion to Christianity. According to Al-Marwazi, in the early 12th century, some Kipchaks were Nestorians, while in Rus they adopted Orthodoxy, and in Hungary, Catholicism. In Islamic states, they often converted to Islam, especially during military service. The main divisions between the different Polovtsi and Kipchak unions ran along the great steppe rivers, such as the Don, Volga, Ural, and others. Although at times some princes from among them rose up and gained more and more supporters, it does not seem that there was any centralized political structure that encompassed all their lands. All Polovtsi and Kipchak princes remained largely independent rulers. Their titulature remains unclear, and although it is customary to call their leaders Khans, there is no definite evidence of the regular use of this title among them. Polovtsi and Kipchak warriors were known for their ferocity and skill in archery and horsemanship. Their mounted archers raided Central Asia, the Caucasus, Central and Southeastern Europe, as well as the principalities of Rus and other nomads, which made the steppes especially dangerous for travel. They often also served as mercenaries. Russian princes frequently sought their military assistance. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the Polovtsians helped the Bohemians and Hungarians in their struggle against the Germans and Austrians. The Byzantine Empire initially formed an alliance with the Polovtsi to destroy the Pechenegs, but by the end of the 12th century, the Polovtsi helped the Bulgarians and Vlachs drive out the Byzantines and establish the Second Bulgarian Empire. A large community of Kipchaks settled in Georgia, where they became valuable allies of the Georgian kings. On the former lands of the Great Seljuks, the Kipchaks could ultimately find themselves on both sides of conflicts, often cementing their alliances through marriages. In Rus, Hungary, and Georgia, many princes married Polovtsi and Kipchak princesses who were baptized and took Christian names. By the way, their pre-baptismal names are generally unknown. In the Khwarezmian Empire, the Kipchaks made up not only a significant part of the Khwarezm Shah's armed forces, but also became part of the ruling elite thanks to numerous marriages with Khwarezmian rulers over several generations. The Kipchaks also played an important role in regional trade. Their horses were highly valued for their endurance in military operations, and their livestock was also actively exported. They acted as intermediaries in trade, transporting goods from Volga, Bulgaria, and Siberia, such as furs, honey, and slaves, to the wider world through the Crimean Peninsula, where many Polovtsians settled as prominent merchants. Some Kipchaks engaged in agriculture, although this was mostly done seasonally. The Codex Cumanicus, a dictionary and linguistic manual from the early 14th century, contains many agricultural terms in the Polovtsian language. Several cities associated with them are mentioned in historical sources. One of them was Saksin, a major trading center on the lower Volga, about which, however, little information has been preserved. Archaeological excavations of burial mounds, such as the Chengol burial mound in southern Ukraine, show that the Kipchak elite had access to a variety of imported goods. Byzantine amphorae, Syrian jugs and Rhine cups, as well as silk kaftans and gold chains, testify to extensive trade connections. It is also worth briefly mentioning the notable mustached masks, which are sometimes associated with the Polovtsians. This hypothesis was put forward by Soviet archaeologists in the early 20th century, but it raises doubts, since the origin of the preserved samples remains unclear. Most of the masks found are associated with burials dated to the Mongol period and are often discovered together with helmets stylistically belonging to the 14th century, which is probably related to the arrival of the Mongols in the western steppes. Although there are images suggesting the use of such masks by the Mongols, there is no direct connection with the Polovtsians. The Polovtsian-Kipchak world changed dramatically with the arrival of the Mongols. The first contact occurred when some of Genghis Khan's enemies, fleeing from the unification of Mongolia, found refuge with the Kipchaks in the Aral Sea region. In 1218, Genghis Khan's eldest son Jochi and the commander Subedei fought a series of battles in western Kazakhstan where they achieved victory. But their troops encountered Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II, whose army included many Kipchaks. When the Great Mongol invasion of Khwarezm began in 1219, the Kipchaks once again fought against the Mongols, although many of them switched sides to join the invaders. After the first invasion, Jochi was sent to the steppes around the Aral Sea to subdue the Kipchaks, while Jebe and Subedi continued their campaign to the west. They fought against the Kipchaks, and Polovtsians in the famous Battle of the Kalka River. Many Kipchaks were captured and sent east to fight against the Jin dynasty, and some even deserted to join the Jin against the Mongols. From 1223 to 1235, conflicts with the Kipchaks flared up from time to time as the Mongol Empire steadily expanded its borders to the Ural River. Genghis Khan and his commanders considered the Kipchaks to be among their most dangerous enemies because of their military potential. In the early 1230s, the Kipchak leader Bakhman led the resistance in the Volga region. However, by 1236, the Mongol invasion led by Subedei and Batu had finally crushed this movement. Some Polovtsians, such as Khatan, fled to Hungary, where the Mongol troops continued to pursue them. By the mid-1240s, during the mid-1240s uprisings, the Mongols had subjugated the Polovtsian Kipchaks. Their lands in the Deshti Kipchak came under Mongol control, and many Kipchaks were recruited into their armies or sold into slavery. Some Kipchaks were sent east and used in Mongol military campaigns, including the conquests of southern China. Over time, the Kipchaks became part of the multinational armies of the Mongols. While their lands came under Mongol rule, those Kipchaks who were sent beyond their homeland showed a high ability to adapt to new conditions. As early as the 12th century, the Polovtsi Kipchaks became one of the preferred sources of Mamluks or Gulams, slave warriors for Islamic states. They were sold at a young age, converted to Islam, trained in military affairs, and equipped with the best gear. They became famous for their combat valor and loyalty to their new masters, often surpassing the monarch's own children in loyalty. The Kipchak Mamluks played an important role in Islamic states such as Ayyubid Egypt and the Delhi Sultanate. The most famous Kipchak Mamluk dynasty was in Egypt. The last rulers of the Ayyubids acquired many Kipchaks as Mamluks, who then seized power in the 1250s. Many of them, including the renowned Sultan Beybaz, were displaced by the Mongols in their youth and, through a twist of fate, went on to inflict the Mongols' most famous defeat at Ain Jalut in 1260. The Egyptian Mamluks continued to purchase new Kipchaks from the steppes, resisting the Mongol Ilkhanate for decades and capturing the last Crusader strongholds in the region. In southeastern Europe, in the 1280s, the Tatar dynasty, likely of Cuman origin, came to power in Bulgaria. Other regional rulers also had connections with the Cumans through marriages. In Hungary, King Béla IV, after the Mongol invasion, invited the Cumans back, granting them vast lands in the center of the kingdom. The Cumans became an important part of the Hungarian army, helping to defend the country from the Mongols and other enemies. Béla married his son Istvan to a Cuman princess, and their son Laszlo, known as Laszlo the Cuman, was fascinated by his mother's culture. Laszlo was so attached to Cuman traditions that he received the nickname Laszlo the Cuman. To this day, the territories given to the Cumans in Hungary are known as Little and Great Cumania. In the Golden Horde, the Mongol state that controlled the former Cuman-Kipchak lands, a process of gradual Turkification was taking place. By the 14th century, the Mongolian language was used only among the nobility and in ceremonial contexts, while the Turkic language became dominant among the population. The Cumans and Kipchaks who lived in the territory of the horde eventually began to identify themselves as Tatars. In the Codex Cumanicus, dated to the early 14th century, the Kipchak language is already referred to as Tatar. The Kipchaks came to be regarded as the ancestors of many modern Turkic peoples of Eurasia, including the Tatars, Kyrgyz, and Kazakhs, whose languages belong to the Kipchak branch of the Turkic language family. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.
Пока.